Welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. My name is Henrik and we are coming to you from a pretty cold west coast of Sweden. Our website is redicecreations.com. That's the place to go for more radio, our news, our members area, and of course our new webcasts, our live webcasts that you shouldn't miss. We've done programs so far with Chris Knowles, Daniel Tatman, Michael Tessarion, Christopher Morse. That's about 2 hours or even more in some cases of basically TV programs for you to enjoy on a variety of subjects. And we are continuing on that trend, and this coming Saturday, the 15th, we're going to have Jake Cutsey with us. Don't miss this. This is a completely new level on live webcasts, as it were. So stay tuned and check out redicecreations.com. On the front page, we have all the information on times and dates and whatnot. And today we have Laurence Gardner with us. He is a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, distinguished as the Chevalier de Saint-Germain. He's a constitutional historian, a Knights Templar of St. Anthony, and is presidential attaché to the European Council of Princes. He is also, of course, the author of Bloodline of the Holy Grail, The Grail Enigma, Genesis of the Grail Kings, and Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, just to mention a few of his titles. And his website is graal.co.uk. That's graal.co.uk. Head over there. There's a lot of information for you there about his books and much more. And I'm really excited about having Laurence with us here today to talk more about his work. So welcome to the program, Laurence, and thank you very much for coming on.
Well, hello, Henrik. It's good to be here at last. We've tried a couple of times and not quite made it, but here we are.
Here we are, finally. Exactly. So if you will, give us a little bit of an overview of some of the work and research that you've kind of done over the years here for people who might not be familiar with your work.
Well, the series of books that I have in publication now, there's 7 actually in print in various languages and editions. I've got another 3 on the stocks waiting to come out in the next year or two. The first of the publications was back in 1996, 1995 in Britain, and then it sort of spread into America and other countries, and that was Bloodline of the Holy Grail. The story of the dynastic bloodline of King David and Jesus, and what I did was I progressed, I suppose, the work that was done by Agent Lee and Lincoln in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, where they set up the scenario for there perhaps being a family descent from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And that struck me as really exciting stuff, because I'd been involved in noble and sovereign genealogies for some years, and I was sitting on a big box of archive of this particular family line, not knowing quite what to do with it. I thought, wow, they've set up the scene. I can write the book on this. So essentially that's what I did. The way that it came about was that my main occupation for some while, in fact, I was in the world of finance in the City of London, but I was also running a picture restoration studio. And by the 1970s, that was my main occupation. And within the course of restoring old masters and paintings, which was what I was doing for the London galleries and other galleries in the country, a lot of the work that I was doing was on portraiture and family pictures going back through the ages. And there they were, sort of adorning the staircases of stately homes and whatever. And although they were there, some of the owners of these houses knew very little about the characters that were portrayed. And I got very involved in just trying to piece the stories together as a matter of personal interest, really, trying to create genealogies to see which family was related to who and that sort of thing. And gradually this sort of whole picture came together, and I began to trace it backwards and backwards and backwards, and found that if you can imagine an upturned triangle with a very wide base now at the top, and it was going back to this sort of point and gradually merging together. And I discovered that very many of these families that came out from a family line, which was originally referred to, once you get back into the very old stuff, as the family of the Desposini. And this is in the sort of genealogical archives. And that intrigued me, so I found that most of the writings about this were by historians from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. And lo and behold, I got led to the apostolic constitutions written from the 1st to the 4th centuries of the Catholic Church, and found within that, and within the writings of Eusebius, who was the church chronicler for Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, quite a lot about this family of the Desposini, and the description that it gave was that they were the descendants of the family of Jesus. Now that intrigued me, because I thought, well, does that really mean that they descended from him, or does it mean they descended from his family? And the Bible gives us quite clearly the fact that he had 4 brothers and sisters, or apparently according to other works which I discovered from that era, there were 3 sisters, so he was sort of one of 8. And so I tried trying to find out from the Vatican Archive and from the Catholic Church authorities what that meant, that the family of Jesus, did it mean him, or did it mean from his brothers and sisters? And they denied the fact that he had any brothers or sisters, and they said that, according to their doctrine, the fact that the Bible says that he had brothers and sisters was wrong. So I said, well, actually, okay, within your own apostolic constitutions, you talk about this family of the Desposini as descended from the family of Jesus. So if you're saying he didn't have brothers or sisters, I take it that you must mean that they descended from him. And they said, well, maybe that was wrong. And so the whole thing got into a terrible mess, and ultimately what I figured was that it was a bit of each. It had to be. These lines couldn't all come from one person, so they must have come from various members of the family. So I really just tried to track down, and I discovered that from the brothers, quite a lot could be traced, actually, in historical record. And this left a couple of particular lines, which came from Jesus himself, and once I got into the writings of St. Clement and St. Origen and one or two others, and they started, we're now sort of in the 2nd century, and they're referring to Mary Magdalene as the bride of Christ in the writings. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. It's exactly what I want. So the book was born, and from then, everything took off. Quite suddenly, I didn't have time to restore pictures anymore. I was also traveling the world, giving lectures, doing radio interviews, with everybody asking me what the next book was going to be about.
Right.
I had no plan to write a next book. And so I just made sure that I did lots of telephone phone-ins, on the radio, and at the lectures had good questions and answer sessions. So what I got was a build-up of the most asked questions. And from those, I wrote the next book, trying to give the answers if I could. And that's what's happened with every book so far. I always answer the most asked questions from the book before.
Right. I see. Okay. So, I mean, in regards to your research and in the beginning, what kind of, or did you go to any special archives somewhere, or did you have to have, special permits or access, or is this done by going to a few of the libraries around London or Rome, or how did that work?
Well, both, actually, all of those things. Going back to those times, of course, it was pre the internet.
Yeah.
So it was a lot more difficult. It was also more difficult for me because I wasn't as practiced at it as I am now, and I didn't know as many people to contact as I know now. In fact, I knew very few. So it was a hard slog. And yes, it did mean traipsing into university libraries, going to libraries abroad, trying to find people who could do translations for me, all of this sort of work. So it was very tough going. But to begin, and until I actually got to the second book, there was no pressure on me. I wasn't doing the research for a book. I was just doing it while I was in various places. I thought, well, okay, I can pop into this library. I can pop into that one. I can go to this university while I'm here. Nobody was pushing me. It wasn't until the second book that the pushing began. And suddenly, what had taken me, maybe 10 or 12 years to put together for the first book, the publishers now wanted in a year and a half. So it was tougher, and still in very early days of the internet. What I've discovered about the internet, and I do use it a lot, but the problem with it is that although it contains a wealth of information, it's probably also the world's greatest source of misinformation.
Sure.
And so one has to be very, very careful. But the way that I use it is that it's actually quite good for discovering where certain things are held. So instead of it being a very difficult job to discover where a particular manuscript or whatever is now, one can find out quite easily from the internet. From that moment, I leave the internet alone, and I'm straight on to that archive and only dealing with them and the documents at hand.
Yes.
So it's all original research. But what I've discovered is that when one starts to read books, books like mine and other books written at the same back for the last 100 years, one discovers that in looking at the notes and references and the bibliography, that essentially every one of a book, it might be about Bonnie Prince Charlie, it doesn't matter what the subject is, but they're basically all using the books written before them on the same subject as their source material. And the next time somebody writes a book, their book becomes a piece of source material. So I decided that the best thing was to endeavor every time to get back to the original source and to try and find the documents that it all began with. And it was very surprising how often the first person maybe to write and use a particular document, let's say it was from the 10th century or the 12th century, as a piece of information, who'd written the book 100 years ago and had everybody else copy from that book subsequently, what had happened was that the first person had got it wrong.
There you go, yeah.
And it's incredible on how many subjects you find that there's this incorrect interpretation or maybe a miscopying of something. It's just gone on and on and on. And I thought, wow, this is no good at all. You know, if I have to try and maintain a credibility in what I do, there are two things that must apply from the beginning, and the first one is that I mustn't set out with a preconception of what I'm going to end up with.
Right.
I mustn't decide what I want to find and then try and prove it fair means or foul. What I wanted to do was to try to get back to the oldest documents available on the subject and simply to record what they say. And so, you know, people have said to me quite often, or they've said to each other, maybe in discussion, you know, Laurence Gardner thinks. Well, I have to confess that nowhere in any of this have I ever particularly thought anything. You know, what I do is to relay what other people have written and said through the ages.
Right, right.
And there are differences. You know, I mean, one can read a newspaper report today, let's say, about a football match, and both journalists will give you the same result. You know, this was the score, Team A beat Team B, but it might well be that each of the journalists supports the opposite teams.
Right.
So the reasons that they'll give you for why Team A beat Team B will be completely different. They'll tell you a different story, but with the same result. And that's what happens in history. And, you know, if one looks at a history of something, let's say it's the Battle of Agincourt in the 1400s of Britain against the French armies at Agincourt, you know, the result of the battle nobody can dispute. But when one reads the English history of it, and then when one reads the French history of the battle, it's an entirely different story. It's a different battle. And so I had to be very, very careful of that sort of thing. And every time I found a document on the subject I was looking for, I tried to find others of the same period, you know, other people who were there at the time. And again, it was quite surprising how different some of them were. And what I learned from that, the biggest lesson that I've learned, is that history really, that we get taught in our schools, you in Sweden and me here in England, is that actually the histories are simply the result of what somebody wrote and thought.
Yes.
We don't get taught alternatives, do we? We just get taught a story, a history, and it might be right or it might not. And so it's been an intriguing journey.
It's a very tricky business, and again, I mean, cross-referencing documents that are several hundred years old, that can't be the easiest job in the world, right?
It can't be.
No.
And it isn't, you know, and to be honest, you know, I didn't actually, when I'd say started, I was researching for quite a long period of time, but, you know, when my first book was published, I was in my 50s, and, you know, it's not often that one does a complete career turn. And it wasn't just that it was a career turn, it ended up being the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And it still is, and yet the compulsion is there to carry on, because in as much as that other people come up with all their questions, I have my own.
Yeah.
You know?